All right, we're going to focus to begin with on the faculty staffing table. This is a fairly complicated table, so we're going to take it step by step. And I've built this example table that shows a lot of the different things that can happen in a department, and we'll see the effect that has on some of the quantities that we're calculating that describe what's going on in your department. The purpose of the faculty staffing table is for us to understand how big your department is, what proportion of full-time and part-time instructors you have, just as a count, how many people are in your department. Also to look at how those folks are doing their work in terms of if there's reassigned times that's taking them away from teaching in the classroom, and also if there are full-time faculty who are doing overload or extra pay, that's going to change kind of the makeup of what's going on in your department. The row that's in bold here is one of the things that's really important, and it summarizes the proportion of full-time and part-time faculty you have in your department in terms of what percent of the FTEF, that is the teaching load of all the courses that are offered by your department, are being taught by full-time faculty at the college rather than part-time faculty. And the reason this is important is that it gives us a benchmark for calculating our faculty obligation number, which it's very convoluted and complex, and it doesn't exactly match this, but it's sort of a ballpark of how we're doing on that. It gives us an idea of what the workload of the department is. The full-time faculty members who are supervising part-time faculty members, that's part of their workload. If there's more part-timers to full-timers, then that means there's more syllabi to supervise, there's more mentoring, more training. So these are some of the ideas that departments may be thinking about when they're looking at this table. All right, so we're going to take it step by step. And we have, across the top, we have different semesters. These data are going back, starting at fall 16, back to fall 10. And depending on when your program review is happening, you're going to have the farthest right row in here is going to be the fall of the last full academic year before I was preparing the data. So it's going to vary a little bit depending on when you're going in the program review cycle. So don't worry about it. I'll make sure that it's correct. We only look at the falls because changes don't happen very fast for faculty staffing, and so we don't need to look at every single semester. Falls and springs are usually not different from one another. If a change happens in the spring, we'll catch up to it the next fall. If you're doing this for your faculty staffing request for getting a new faculty member hired in your department, this is exactly the same table, except instead of going over 5 or 6 or 7 years just looking at falls, it'll be the last 5 semesters. So it'll include springs and falls. So if you're learning about this table because you're going to be filling out a faculty staffing request, then what I'm explaining here is exactly the same, except the semesters the data is over is a shorter period of time and also includes the springs. So let's start over here in the far left-hand side. This is the beginning of the history of our department that's shown here. And we're going to have at the very top row the full-time faculty count. This is a made-up department for this example that has 4 full-time faculty in the department. So when they go to their department meeting, those are the people that show up. And the part-time faculty count is the different number of part-time faculty for this semester that are teaching in the department. So if a part-time faculty member is teaching 2 courses, they just get counted as 1 person. So this is a count of the bodies of the people. All right. So these data all the way across in the top row, the full-time faculty count and the part-time faculty count. We always want departments to double check these data because there's these quirky things that can happen with how these counts end up getting into the data system. So all the database does in order to pull the data that I look at in order to fill these tables in is it looks at, is the course identified in this department as being taught by a full-timer or a part-timer based on their code in payroll, and then it counts up how many of those folks there are. So if we have a full-time person who's teaching in another department, like so a chemistry instructor is teaching a physical science course, who's a full-time member in the chemistry department, he will get counted as a member of the physical sciences department. So this system isn't very smart. It doesn't know what department you belong to. It just knows your category of full-time versus part-time. So sometimes we have a full-timer that gets counted in another department. If we have part-timers that are teaching in more than one department as well, they'll get counted in each of those departments. Yeah, Joyce.
What about adjunct faculty?
Adjunct and part-time faculty are counted as the same thing. All right. All right, so part-time or adjuncts. All right, so we're going to look at this next set of boxes, the full-time FTEF, the extra pay FTEF, the part-time FTEF, and the total FTEF. The total is the sum of the other three things. So we should have 3.6 and 6.4 adding up to 10.0. The total FTEF, full-time equivalent faculty, is how many of the load units for all the course sections that are being taught in that semester add up to. So say this department taught only courses that were loaded out on your higher letter as 0.2, right? We'd need to have, darn it, I should have planned this ahead of time. However many times 0.2 we get to add up to 10, that's how many course sections are being offered. So this depends on your schedule of all the course sections being offered in your department and on what they're loaded out as. So if there's a lab that's 0.15, that gets added up with the lecture that's 0.2, and then we add up all of those together. All right, so this represents all of the course sections that are getting taught. If the course section is getting taught by a full-time faculty member, that gets added up in this value. If it's taught as extra pay, so above 1.0 teaching load for the semester, then that will be extra pay for the full-time faculty. But we want to count those as courses that are being taught by a full-time faculty member because they're being taught by a full-time faculty member. The part-time FTEF is going to be the total of the amount of course section load that is added up with all of the part-time faculty teaching it. All right?
Makes sense.
Yes? Yes? Okay. It seems so simple.
So it's the sum of the loads of the part-time sections?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, some of the loads of all of the sections being taught by part-time or adjunct faculty. All right, so we should have the full-time FTEF, extra pay FTEF, part-time FTEF. They add up to the total FTEF. Now, the reason we want to calculate that is because we want to know the full-time percent. Right? The full-time percent is going to tell us, out of all of that load of all those course sections, how much of it is being taught by full-time faculty. Right? So here we have, because we have 10 FTEF, that we see because 3.6 is taught by full-time faculty members, we have 36% full-time faculty. So that's not the ratio of the 4 and the 15 at the top. Right? It's not a count. It's based on how much load is being taught by folks in those different categories. Okay? So this number, the full-time percent, this is often what departments focus on. If this number is really low, like below 30, you don't have very many full-timers compared to part-timers doing the work in that department. Right? So below 30 is really low. We don't really want any departments to have over about 75% full-time percent because as the economy changes and our course offerings have to go up and down in order to meet demand, we want to have a little cushion of being able to unfortunately for part-timers, of being able to hire and fire them. And really, we think of them as contingent faculty. This is the idea that they were intended originally to fill. We don't want to hire so many full-time faculty that they're all at 100% load teaching, and then a recession, well, an economic boom hits. Nobody wants to come to community college. We decrease the offerings of our courses, and now we have more full-time faculty hired permanently forever then we have courses to teach. So more than 75% full-time faculty would be an issue if we had to cut back sections, so that little cushion. Now, the reality is that most of our departments are at about 50%. Yeah, Nate?
So a question on that then, is administration hesitant to hire at a high watermark? Like,
is there a place where administration will say, absolutely no, there's no way you're going to get a faculty member if your percent is above that?
like
Is that your
if
question?
Percentage is low. Like I only have 27% full-timers, and we're at a low dip as far as total enrollment. I guess, does that make sense? Like enrollment period, but we're also at a high full-time faculty. Are they less? Like, those two go together. I don't know if I'm asking it the right way.
So as our enrollments change, these numbers are going to go up and down as well. So there's a lag time typically between when maybe we've increased our course offerings, and so our percent full-timers has gone down because we've added a bunch of new sections, we've got adjuncts to teach them. It'll be a few semesters probably before the administration would even think of hiring somebody to, like, is this sustainable? Are we going to have, is this your new normal of how big your course offering selection is going to be? So there's going to be some variation from year to year and semester to semester. In order to demonstrate some particular points, I've made a few decisions about setting particular values the same. So the one that I set the same all the way across is the total FTEF offered by this department. So that as we vary other things, we can see how that affects the full-time percent. But the other thing that could happen is that departments could actually decrease the total course offerings that they're offering, in which case their full-time percent would likely go up, because if they cut sections, they're going to cut the ones that are taught by part-time faculty and transfer those courses to full-time. So if they decrease their offerings, we'll usually see the full-time percent go up. If they increase their course offerings, they're going to be populating those new courses with part-time instructors, so you'll typically see the full-time percent go down when we're growing. Right? So if that growth ends up being sustainable, then eventually you would want to ask for another full-timer.
Thank you.
All right. So the other thing in the table here, the reason why we have 3.6 full-time faculty in this department, even though there's 4 people, is because one of those people is department chair, and they're going to get 0.4 reassigned time for doing the duties of the chair every semester. Right? So this RT is reassigned time, and so those are non-teaching responsibilities that, that full-time faculty members can get. So that's the reason why we have less than 4.0 on the full-time FTEF. So the department chair reassigned time is pretty stable from semester to semester. Depending on the department, that may change from one person to another, but that's always going to be with this department. So that's why it's called permanent reassigned time. That means it's permanent with that department. Right? And it will keep coming back every semester. We always need to take into account that somebody's going to be doing that work. The other category down here, temporary reassigned time, is reassigned time that faculty members may take on that's not specific to their department. So being the chair of a committee, for doing some other work around the college, like the reassigned time I get for program review liaison, or for SLO coordinator, or for academic senate president. Those are things that when that academic senate president steps down, that reassigned time will likely go to a different department. So it's considered temporary. The other category I added to this table because sometimes there's something going on in the department that changes these numbers that we want to know about. So most of the time we aren't going to have anything down here, but occasionally, say somebody goes on sabbatical, that is going to change what the other numbers look like. So if we don't have this row in the table, then it may look like something funny is happening in the department. All right, so let's go through a few more steps and see what happens to these numbers when we change something in the department. So here we have between fall 10 and fall 11, somebody retired from this department. So they went from 4 full-time faculty down to 3. So we had a change here. The total FTEF is the same, but they had to increase the number of part-time FTEF to fill the courses that were taught by that person after they retired. Susie?
Oh, no.
All right, so they're still not doing any extra pay. So we took 1.0 of the full-time FTEF and moved it to part-time because we don't have that person anymore, we filled in. All right, so we also have a couple of more adjuncts in our account because we needed people to teach those courses. So this decreases the full-time percent. It's a fairly small department, so when we change 1.0 on these numbers, we actually get a 10% change in this. All right, so a really big department, you could take one faculty member out, and you aren't even going to change a percent or two. So it's going to depend on the size of the department. I picked a small one so we could see these effects. All right, so now this lucky department gets approval to have their new faculty member hired to replace that retired person the next semester. So when you're the chair of a hiring committee, you get 0.15 reassigned time for chairing that hiring committee. So in my tables, you're going to see there's a 0.15 in the temporary reassigned time down here to reflect that somebody from that department was the chair of the hiring committee. And then we get 4 faculty members again when we get to the next semester. So they hired somebody, right? So we replaced that person. So in the meantime, these department members decided that maybe they had trouble getting enough adjuncts to teach, and so they switched what they were doing from this semester to this semester. They all decided to teach as much extra pay as they're allowed to. All right, so they added overload to their schedule, so they took those courses instead of having adjuncts teach them. So even though there's a little more reassigned time down here, they actually ended up teaching more full-time load than they did in the previous year. So that decreases the part-time load, and their full-time percent goes up quite a bit. All right, so when we have faculty doing extra pay assignments, it's totally dependent on the department whether that's okay or not with how they're running their department. Some departments, people really enjoy doing that. They want the extra money. It's totally fine. They're on top of it. And in other departments, they're running around like chickens with their head cut off. And so even though there's a high full-time percent, it's not sustainable. It doesn't reflect that the department is really well functioning in that case, right? They're just exhausted. They can't do anything, and they don't want to keep doing it. Right? So sometimes we have a department that comes in, faculty staffing, and they say, we need a new faculty member, and you look at their percent, and you're like, but your full-time percent is high. And they say, well, look at all the extra pay we're doing. We can't find adjuncts. We're killing ourselves. We're exhausted. We're all ready to quit. We need a new faculty member. Right? So there's not only the numbers that are in the table that are important, but the narrative of what this means for your department. All right, so we hired our new faculty member. Everybody breathed a huge sigh of relief. They went back to doing no extra pay. And so we're kind of back to where we started from over there. So we've returned to 36%. All right, so the next thing that happens in this department is that one of the department members, now we're back to 4 people, somebody takes on a job of doing, say, program review committee chair, and they're going to get 0.2 reassigned time. So this person is now moving a little bit over to the reassigned time rather than teaching. We need another adjunct to fill in their position, and just moving from doing teaching into having more reassigned time in your department, that's also going to decrease your full-time percent. We went from 36 down to 34 just by somebody taking a 0.2 reassigned time. Right? So how much total reassigned time folks in your department are doing is going to, as your reassigned time goes up, your full-time percent is going to go down. All right, so the next thing that happens here is that one of our hardworking faculty members is going on sabbatical this semester. So we want to count that person in the count at the top. They aren't disappearing from their department, right? But they're disappearing from the load of full-time faculty. So if we didn't see down here that there was a person on sabbatical, then we'd be confused about what happened to this number. These numbers don't add up, right? So we've got a person who is still in the department. They're coming back next year. We don't want to hire somebody to replace them. But we've cut a whole 1.0 out of the full-time faculty, right? So we want to know where that went, right? Now they dropped down to 24% full-time teaching. But then when this person comes back from sabbatical, it pops right back up again to where it was. So this is temporary.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that would be the same if somebody's pulling bank leave. Like, you know, some
Yeah, so the,
do it all at once, and they take a whole semester off, and others, like, they meter it out.
Yeah.
Class a semester.
So the sabbatical could be a half for 2 semesters. It could be somebody who's on bank leave. It could be somebody who has decreased load due to a health issue. It could be somebody who's doing decreased load before you retire. You're allowed to cut your load down. So any of those things that are going on in the department are going to impact your full-time percent. And you want to know why that's happening. What is that a temporary thing? Is it a permanent thing? What's going to happen with it? So any of those could go in this other category. So the very last column out here to the right is what's going to happen if we hire another faculty member in this department. And when we're thinking about, are we going to hire another faculty member, we want to see how that's going to impact the full-time percent. So in order to make it simple, we just add one person. We add 1.0 to their full-time FTEF. We take one away from their part-time FTEF and see what the impact on the full-time percent is. So if we added one faculty member to this department, we increase the full-time percent 10% because of the way I worked out the example. So they're still under 50% if they hire one full-time faculty member. If they hire 2 full-time faculty members and everything else stays the same, they're going to go up to 55%. If they hire 3 full-time faculty members and everything else stays the same, they're going to go to 65%. 4, they're going to go to 75%, right? So we definitely wouldn't want to see that department get any bigger than that, just to make sure we have enough cushion to downsize in those times that we need to. So this is the main goal of this table. To me, this is a picture of things that have happened in your department. But you also, as a department, need to explain why these things are happening and how they affect how you are able to function in your department and sort of what they mean, right? Because they're numbers and they tell us a certain amount, but they don't necessarily tell us the whole picture. Most departments, when they look at their faculty staffing table, they think, because they don't have all this stuff happening. They may have the same number of full-time faculty all the way across, and so they're not really sure what to say about what's going on in this table. If everything's really consistent, then that's fine. But when I look at faculty staffing tables from all different departments around campus, they look really different than one another. And so that is part of the reason why all the different elements that are in here and how they interact with one another are important, because maybe they're not important in your department, but they're important in somebody else's department. All right, so when we're trying to put our data into context from our own department, I want to show you a couple of slides that let you see where you might be at in terms of department size. So what does it mean to be a department of 3 with 16 adjunct faculty? If we look at each of the departments around campus, we have about 40 departments around campus. If we look at them by discipline, not by sort of how they organize themselves as departments, and the distribution of how many full-time faculty are in each of those departments is shown on this graph. So some discipline areas have 0 full-time faculty. These are departments where it's really important that they have working professionals in the field actually teaching those courses, and they may be a small certificate program with not very many courses like ortho tech, and that works perfectly well for that department. Most of our departments have between 3 and 8 full-time faculty, so those are moderate size. And then we have math and English over here with an unusually large number of faculty because they're just really big departments. So when I first looked at these kinds of data, I was like, oh, my department's actually sort of medium-sized. So that's interesting if you have no idea. This graph is the same thing, except it's showing the distribution of how many part-time faculty each department or discipline area has. So we have a few departments with only 1 part-time faculty member, and we have a few departments over here, again, math and English, with a lot of adjunct faculty. So the total amount of faculty in your department, the total amount of part-time faculty in your department are going to represent kind of the workload that this department does, wrangling all the paperwork for all of these part-time faculty, how many you're going to hire in any given semester because you lost some other ones. This is a much bigger job. So the department chairs in these departments with very large numbers of adjunct faculty get more reassigned time. But if we look across all the different departments, we find that most departments have a ratio of full-time to part-time of about 1 full-timer to about 3 or 4 part-timers. So I just took the numbers from the first graph and the numbers from the second graph. And so that gives us an indication of, for each full-timer, kind of how many part-timers would they be responsible maybe for mentoring or coordinating with for the courses that they're teaching. This ratio depends a lot on what kind of department it is. In a lot of the CTE areas, they have working professionals coming in to teach one class. They have a lot of part-time folks, but that is how their department works. That is what they rely on, the expertise of those folks coming in with a variety of different skills that a full-time academic may not have. Other departments, they have very few part-time faculty, and that the full-time faculty are taking on most of the jobs. So it totally depends on the situation of the department. Whether having a lot of adjuncts versus having a lot of full-timers makes sense. If we look at the full-time faculty percent across all the departments, we also see that there's kind of this middle where most departments are. That most departments are between 40 and 60% of full-time FTF. We have a couple where it's really high, and we have a few where it's really low. These zeros are actually, there's no full-timers at all in the department. So we have departments that are down here with 10 to 20% of full-time faculty. Those are ones where if the structure of the department allows it, then they probably are really desperate to hire somebody. Whereas people who are over on this end of the ratio here, they're not likely to be getting any full-time hires, right? Because they're really high ratios compared to the other departments. So we're actually about 50% on average. All right. So this concludes the section of my presentation that is regarding the faculty staffing table.